I first noticed the envelopes in early March, thick, official, the kind that make your stomach tighten before you even slit them open. They arrived 2 or 3 at a time, addressed to me in the stiff, mechanical handwriting of a printer. To Mr. Charles H. Merton. Subject: Notice of payment due. Payment due. For what exactly? The house had been paid off for more than 20 years. I'd made the final check out in 1998, the same year my wife, Mary, and I stood on this porch with cheap champagne in plastic cups and promised never to owe a cent to anyone again. I remember thinking the first letter was just a mix-up. Banks do that. They merge, rename, forget, and send a storm of bureaucratic nonsense. I tossed it into the kitchen drawer, the one already crowded with appliance manuals and expired coupons. But then a second envelope came, then a third, each one bolder in tone. Important, immediate action required. Past due statement. By the 5th letter, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The paper crackled as I unfolded it at the kitchen table. The smell of dust and old varnish filled the air. Sunlight came through the curtains in thin, tired lines. According to the notice, I had an outstanding balance of $319,672.84 on my active mortgage account. They even had a loan number. I ran my finger over it as if touching the ink might make the absurdity vanish. Mortgage. The kettle whistled on the stove, sharp and angry. I turned it off, poured the water into my old chip mug, and watched the steam rise. It wasn't the kind of morning for panic. Not yet. I'd dealt with enough paperwork in my years at the Postal Service to know mistakes happened. Still, there was something unsettling about how confident the letter sounded, as if it knew something I didn't. Outside, the mailman, young fellow, probably in his 30s, was halfway down the street, earbuds in, jacket unbuttoned against the early spring breeze. I used to walk those same steps back when every house on Oak Ridge Lane had kids on bicycles and wives tending to flower beds. Now the lawns looked identical, like the people inside them had been factory issued. I shuffled back to the living room and set the letter beside the framed photograph of Mary. She was smiling in that soft, modest way she always did, head tilted slightly as if listening. "They're saying we owe $320,000, I said aloud. Can you believe that? The silence of the house pressed in around me. I still half expected her to answer. That evening I called my son, Brian. He didn't pick up at first, probably another of those endless conference calls he bragged about. "Finance sector, Dad," he'd once said. Not for the faint of heart. When he finally answered, his voice was distracted, metallic, with background noise. "Hey, Dad, everything okay? I've been getting letters from a bank. Says there's a mortgage on the house. Something about missed payments." There was a pause, then a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, that's just spam, probably. Some refinancing ad or whatever. You know how they target seniors with that stuff?" "I don't think so. They used my full name, my address. They listed the loan number. Still a mix-up. Don't worry about it. Just toss them. You don't want to get scammed." His tone changed slightly at the end, too casual, too rehearsed. "All right," I said slowly. "You're sure?" "Of course I'm sure. Look, I've got to run into a meeting, but I'll swing by this weekend." "Okay, we'll sort through your mail then." Before I could reply, the line went dead. The rest of that week I tried to ignore the letters, but they kept coming. One on Tuesday, 2 on Thursday. Each envelope thicker than the last, with fine print and stamped barcodes. By Saturday morning, my kitchen drawer wouldn't close properly. I took out all the letters, stacked them in a neat pile, and ran a finger along the edges. There were so many now they felt like a book, an uninvited biography of my financial ruin. At the bottom of the pile, one envelope was slightly different. Heavier paper, embossed logo, First Federal Home Lending. I turned it over. There was a return address from Denver, the same city where Brian worked. That gave me a strange chill. Coincidence, maybe, but in stories, Coincidences are always warnings. I poured another cup of tea, stared at the unopened envelope, and said softly, "Mary, I think time I found out what the hell's going on." The house creaked in agreement, and for the first time in months, I felt truly awake. It took me an entire morning to find the right number. The letterhead listed 3, one for general inquiries, one for loan servicing, and one ominously labeled collections. I called the first. "Welcome to First Federal Home Lending. For English, press 1. 15 minutes of robotic voices later, I was still pressing numbers, still listening to that syrupy loop of instrumental jazz that seemed designed to erode sanity one saxophone note at a time. Finally, a woman answered. "Thank you for calling First Federal Home Lending. This is Tracy. How can I assist you today?" Her voice was bright in that trained customer service way, pleasant but distant, as if smiling through glass. "Yes, good morning," I said, careful to sound composed. "I'm calling about some letters I received. Apparently, there's a mortgage under my name, but that can't be correct. My property's been paid off for decades." "Okay," she said cheerfully, as if I'd reported a missing coupon. "Let me pull up your account. May I have your date of birth, sir?" I gave it. Listened to the clacking of keys, a pause, and then a soft "Mr. Merton," she said after a moment, "I do see a mortgage account here. It was opened, let me check. Yes, 3 months ago. December 14th of last year. Balance, $320,000. The numbers landed like a physical blow. "Excuse me," I said. "Yes, it's an active 30-year fixed loan. Payments are behind by 1 month." "There's a mistake," I interrupted, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I haven't taken any loan. I don't owe you or anyone $300,000. Tracy hesitated, her professional tone cracking just slightly. "Sir, do you perhaps have a cosigner? A family member who might have taken the loan on your behalf?" "No, absolutely not." She clicked her tongue softly, the way people do when they don't quite believe you. "Well, sir, someone with your personal information, social security number, date of birth, and signature, completed this application. It's legally binding. Do you want me to send you copies of the documents?" "Yes," I said immediately. "Every page." "Certainly, Mr. Merton. We'll mail them to the address we have on file." "That would be this house, wouldn't it?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "The mortgage property address, 812 Oak Ridge Lane." My throat went dry. That was my home, my only home. I thanked her, hung up, and sat very still. For a moment, the kitchen blurred. The ticking clock on the wall grew unbearably loud, matching the pulse pounding in my ears. I stared at the worn laminate countertop where Mary used to roll out pie crusts every Sunday. The faint pattern of flour still stained the edges if you looked closely enough. $320,000. Someone had stolen my name, my house, my past, all with the stroke of a pen. I didn't tell Brian that day. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I called the local police station, half hoping they'd tell me it was some elaborate scam that would resolve itself by Monday. The officer who answered sounded young, too young. I could almost hear his shrug through the phone. "Sir, these cases usually fall under financial fraud. You'll need to contact the bank's fraud department and possibly the credit bureau." "I've already spoken to the bank," I said. "They're sending documents. What am I supposed to do in the meantime?" "Monitor your accounts, Mr. Merton. Don't share personal info with anyone. And if it turns out someone forged your signature, you'll have to file a formal report." He paused. "Do you have any idea who might have had access to your documents?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I did have an idea. 2 years earlier, after my knee surgery, Brian had come over with a stack of forms for emergencies. Durable power of attorney, he'd called it, just to make life easier. "Don't worry, Dad," he'd said, smiling that charming, efficient smile of his. "It's just paperwork. You'll still be in control of everything." I signed because I was tired, because he was my son, because he'd brought me soup and painkillers when I couldn't get out of bed. Now the memory made me feel physically ill. I went to the living room and sat down on Mary's old recliner. The fabric was worn smooth from her years of reading there, a little sun-bleached along the arms. The smell of old wood and lavender still lingered faintly in the cushions. I picked up the phone again, my thumb hovering over Brian's contact. What would I even say? Did you take out a mortgage using my name? No, that wasn't how fathers talk to sons. Not at first. So instead, I pressed call. He answered on the third ring. Hey, Dad, you doing all right? Fine, I said, though the word felt like ash in my mouth. Listen, I talked to someone from a bank today. Something about a mortgage. He didn't speak right away. There was a faint click, maybe him muting something on his computer. Oh, that? Yeah, don't worry about it, he said quickly. It's just some refinancing paperwork, clerical overlap from when I helped with your taxes last year. They must have pulled your file by mistake. You helped with my taxes? I repeated slowly. I don't remember you touching any paperwork. Sure you do, he said, laughing lightly. You gave me your files, remember? Anyway, I'll straighten out next week. Don't lose sleep over it, okay? His tone was too smooth to prepared. I could almost hear the salesman in him, the one who could turn a lie into a contract with a steady voice and a confident smile. Brian, I said quietly, this isn't some mix-up, is it? Dad, he interrupted, suddenly sharper. You're overthinking. You've got to trust me on this. Trust. The word stung more than it should have. All right, I said finally. We'll talk when you come by. Sure thing. Gotta run now, though, client call. Love you. He hung up before I could respond. I sat in the fading afternoon light, phone still warm in my hand. Through the living room window, I could see the oak tree Mary had planted the year Brian was born. Its branches were bare now, black against the gray March sky. Somewhere deep down, I knew. I just wasn't ready to say it yet. I looked at her photograph again and murmured, looks like our boy finally found a way to make money for me. The house was silent, but in that silence, I could almost hear her voice, soft, warning, tired. Be careful, Charlie. He's too much like you used to be. The envelope arrived 4 days later, thick and heavy enough to make the mailbox creak when I pulled it open. No return address this time, only the embossed seal of First Federal Home Lending. Raised ink, sharp to the touch. I carried it inside like something fragile, something that might explode. The kitchen clock ticked so loudly it sounded like it was timing the unraveling of my sanity. I made tea before opening it, though my hands trembled too much to pour without spilling. The steam curled through the air, mingling with the faint scent of lemon cleaner and the damp chill of early April. I slit the envelope open with the same letter opener I'd bought on our honeymoon in 1973. Mary had picked it out at a tiny shop in Savannah. Engraved brass handle, shaped like a feather. She'd said it made even bills feel poetic. Now it was cutting through betrayal. Inside were photocopies. 20 pages stapled and clipped, the top sheet stamped loan agreement in thick black ink. There it was, my name printed neatly across the top, my address, my social security number, and at the bottom of the last page, my signature. Or rather, someone's version of it. The curve of the C in Charles was almost perfect, but the rest of it, too neat, too confident. My own handwriting shook a little these days, uneven from age and arthritis. This signature didn't shake. It stood tall and arrogant, written by a man with something to prove. The same man, perhaps, who used to mock my old-fashioned way of balancing a checkbook. I flipped through the pages, each one worse than the last. Interest rate, 6.8%. Loan term, 30 years. Collateral. Primary residence at 812 Oak Ridge Lane. There was even a scanned copy of my driver's license attached to the file. A perfect reproduction, photo, address, signature. Except I'd never lost my ID. Never replaced it. That meant someone had copied it somewhere. Someone who'd had access to my personal documents. The final page was the notarization section. I read the name twice. K. Donnelly, Notary Public, Denver County. A bold, looping signature and a date. December 14th, 2024. My stomach tightened. Denver. The same city Brian worked in. I set the papers down carefully. Lined them up with military precision on the table. I'd learned that habit from my postal days. Keep everything straight, everything verifiable. Then I sat back, staring at my own forged name. There are moments when disbelief gives way to a kind of awful clarity, like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. I remembered suddenly and vividly the night 2 years earlier when Brian had stood right here, in this same kitchen, with a stack of documents in his hands. "You should let me handle this stuff for you, Dad," he'd said, sliding the papers across the table. Power of attorney, tax forms, emergency medical consent, all standard. "It'll save time if something happens." I'd hesitated, but he'd smiled, that same charming, confident smile that had gotten him out of every mess since he was 16. "You trust me, don't you?" I had. Of course I had. He was my son. Mary would have warned me. She always had sharper instincts. But she was gone by then, and I was tired, lonely, grateful for his company. Even if it came with a side of manipulation I pretended not to see. So I signed, now staring at the imitation of that same signature. I realized he'd been preparing for this all along. I turned the papers over, hoping to find some hidden mistake, some detail that would absolve him. But the evidence was immaculate. Everything matched perfectly. No amateur could have done this alone. That meant help, someone on the inside. Maybe this notary. Maybe someone at the bank. Or maybe Brian was simply better at lying than I'd ever imagined. By afternoon, I'd spread the documents across the kitchen table like pieces of a crime scene. Sunlight moved slowly across them, highlighting the small details, initials in the margins, a faint coffee ring near the notary stamp. I started taking notes. Old habits die hard. Dates, names, numbers. When I reached for a pen, I noticed something I hadn't before, an electronic transfer record attached to the back of the file. Recipient account. B. Merton Enterprises, LLC. My hand froze. LLC. Brian had mentioned that name before. Last Thanksgiving over pumpkin pie, when he bragged about expanding his business portfolio. I hadn't understood much of it, just the vague, expensive sound of success. Apparently, that portfolio included my house. I pressed my palms against the table, breathing through the ache in my chest. He thought I'd never notice. I whispered to the empty kitchen. Too old, too tired, too trusting. The kettle whistled again, harsh, urgent, almost angry, and I turned it off with more force than necessary. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room under the low hum of the ceiling fan, the papers stacked beside me. The lamplight made everything yellow and unreal, like an old photograph. Every few minutes, I'd hear the creak of the house settling, the faint whir of the refrigerator. Normal sounds, but I found myself listening differently, as if the house itself were alive and aware of the theft. I looked around at the things Mary and I had built together. The oak bookshelves I'd made by hand, the worn armchair she claimed as hers, the crocheted blanket still folded neatly on its armrest. If Brian had his way, all of this, every nail, every memory, would be collateral. I leaned forward and whispered into the dim light. Not this time, boy. Not this house. Not my name. The clock ticked once, twice like an agreement. I turned off the lamp and sat there in the dark, waiting for morning. Saturday came gray and wet, the kind of rain that seeps into everything. Coat collars, shoe seams, thoughts. I'd spent the whole night rehearsing what I'd say to him, but no version of that speech seemed right. Every sentence felt either too angry or too pathetic. So when I finally climbed into my old Buick and turned onto the freeway toward Denver, I told myself I'd just ask for the truth. That was all. Just the truth. The drive took nearly 2 hours. The windshield wipers made a slow, hypnotic rhythm, like a heartbeat I couldn't calm down. By the time I reached Brian's neighborhood, wide streets, manicured lawns, matching SUVs in every driveway, my nerves had worn thin. His house sat on a corner lot, new construction, all white siding and black trim, the kind of architectural smugness that looks expensive but empty. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, watching raindrops slide down the glass. A little girl in a pink raincoat ran across the yard next door, splashing through puddles. I wondered if Brian's children would ever know the value of puddles. Then I remembered he didn't have kids yet. Too busy building, he always said. Building indeed. I grabbed the folder with the documents, neatly stacked, corner-clipped, and stepped out into the rain. Kelly opened the door. My daughter-in-law was still beautiful, still distant, as polished as the marble countertop. She probably hadn't cleaned herself in years. Charles, what a surprise. Her smile was all teeth and tension. I left you voicemail, I said, shaking rain from my jacket. I need to speak with Brian. He's just finishing a call. Work never stops, you know. She laughed lightly, but her eyes flicked down to the folder in my hand. Something in her expression shifted, a flicker of recognition, maybe fear. I'll wait. I stepped past her before she could object. The house smelled like coffee and something artificial, air freshener trying to cover the scent of money. The foyer was lined with framed photos of vacations. Hawaii, Paris, Cancun. In every picture, Brian had that same grin, charming, confident, hollow. When he finally appeared at the top of the stairs, phone still in hand, his face froze for half a second before he recovered his salesman's smile. Dad, you could have called. I did. He slipped the phone into his pocket. Right. Sorry. Crazy week. Want some coffee? No. The word came out sharper than I intended. He looked at the folder. What's that? I placed it on the kitchen island between us and opened it. The papers fanned out like a deck of poison cards. This, I said quietly, is what I got from the bank. He glanced down, and for the first time in years, I saw something real pass across his face, not guilt exactly, but the moment a liar realizes the curtain's been pulled back. Dad, you shouldn't have worried yourself. It's complicated paperwork, that's all. Complicated paperwork that lists my house as collateral? He exhaled loudly, leaning on the counter, performing exasperation. Look, I was going to tell you. It's a short-term investment arrangement. I just used your name to secure a better rate. It's perfectly safe. Use my name, I repeated, without telling me. Dad, it's not like that. You have great credit, you're retired, stable income. The system loves borrowers like you. It's just business. He said it like business was sacred. Like that single word erased every moral boundary between father and son. Business? I said, that's my house, Brian. Your mother and I built our lives in that place. She died in that house. You mortgaged her memory like it was some line of credit. He looked away, jaw tightening. Don't make this emotional. I almost laughed. You stole from me, and I'm not supposed to be emotional? Borrowed, he snapped, his tone suddenly defensive. The money's going into a property flip. I'll pay back in a few months, tops. You'll never even feel the difference. I already feel it, I said quietly. He pushed away from the counter, pacing. You're blowing this out of proportion. You always do. I'm trying to build something here, Dad. A legacy. For us. For us? He stopped pacing. I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the old reflex to charm, to twist. I've been working my ass off for years, he said, his voice rising. You think I want to use your name? The banks won't take risks anymore. This was an opportunity. I did what had to be done. I stared at him for a long time, long enough that he started to fidget. You forged my signature. I signed for both of us, like power of attorney allows. You signed after the power expired. He flinched. Just barely, but I saw it. I stepped closer, lowered my voice. You think I'm too old to read fine print. You think I'm too slow to notice when my own blood steals the roof over my head. Tell me, Brian, did you practice my handwriting? Or did you just wing it? His eyes darted to Kelly, who had appeared silently in the doorway, arms folded. Her face was pale. Brian, she said softly, you told me it was your investment. Not now, Kelly, he snapped. I looked at her. The first time I really looked. The nervous flutter of her hands, the faint tremor in her voice when she added, I didn't know you used your father's house. He turned on her, anger flaring. It's temporary, okay? Don't start. Something about that tone, the contempt, made me colder than the rain outside. I picked up the folder, tapped it square, slid it back under my arm. You've made your position clear. Dad, don't. I raised my hand, and for a moment he fell silent, the obedient boy flickering behind the man he'd become. When your mother was alive, I said, she used to worry that you'd turn into one of those men who mistake greed for ambition. I told her not to worry, that you were decent at heart. He looked away, and I was wrong. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of rain hitting the wide windows. I'll fix this, he said finally. Just don't do anything rash. Oh, I won't, I said, stepping toward the door. Rashes for young men. I prefer methodical. Kelly followed me out, whispering, I'm sorry, Charles. I nodded once. So am I. When I reached my car, I looked back through the rain-blurred windshield. Through the kitchen window, Brian stood motionless, phone in hand, probably already calling someone to handle the situation. He still thought I'd let it go. He still thought I was weak, sentimental, easily soothed. He had no idea that the old man in the rain was already building something stronger than his lies. A plan. And this time, it would be my turn to sign the papers. By Monday morning, I'd already spoken to 3 people who told me in polite variations that I was probably mistaken. The bank's fraud department, a county clerk, and one young man at the police desk who called me sir. So often it felt like a form of dismissal. Everyone had the same tone, sympathetic but tired, the tone used for the elderly when they start talking about conspiracies. But the documents didn't lie. So I called the only man who still believed my word had weight, Harold Brooks, my old colleague from the Postal Service. He'd gone into law after retirement, opening a modest practice in the back of an insurance office downtown. When he answered, his voice was gravel and warmth at once. Charles Merton, I thought you died or joined a monastery. Neither, I said, but I need your help. Then you must really be in trouble, he said. You were never the type to ask for help. He wasn't wrong. His office smelled like dust leather and the faint sweetness of pipe tobacco. The walls were lined with framed diplomas and faded photos. Harold shaking hands with local mayors, a few awards for pro bono work. I laid the folder on his desk. He put on his reading glasses and flipped through the first few pages, his brows knitting tighter with every line. After 10 minutes, he leaned back and exhaled. Son of a bitch, he muttered. I'd appreciate a more legal term, I said. He smiled faintly. All right, fraud, forgery, violation of fiduciary responsibility, and possibly wire fraud, depending on how those electronic transfers were processed. So it's serious. Charles, he said, looking up at me, your son committed a felony. Multiple, actually. I didn't answer right away. The words sounded heavy, unfit for human mouths. Your son committed a felony. I stared out the window. A drizzle had started again, faint streaks on the glass. Harold tapped his pen. The good news, he continued, is that the law's on your side. The notary's signature is sloppy. We can contest that. The handwriting analysis will confirm the forgery. And if you still have the original power of attorney papers, I can prove it expired before the mortgage was filed. I nodded slowly. I kept every document I ever signed. Mary used to call me a hoarder of ghosts. He chuckled. Then those ghosts might just save you. We worked for hours, copying, sorting, highlighting. He dictated a list of steps, his tone brisk, but kind. File a fraud affidavit with the bank. Request a certified copy of the notarization file from Denver County. Freeze the mortgage account pending investigation. Contact the credit bureaus. I wrote it all down carefully, though my hands were trembling by the end. When we finished, Harold sat back, studying me. Charles, are you sure you want to press charges? I met his eyes. He used my name, Harold. My home. My dead wife's memory. I don't think I can just pretend it didn't happen. He nodded slowly. Still, this won't be easy. Once this goes to court, it'll be public. Reporters love cases like this. Elderly father betrayed by son. It'll ruin him. I gave a humorless laugh. He's already ruined, Harold. I'm just putting it in writing. Before I left, he clasped my shoulder. I'll start the paperwork today. You'll get a copy of everything by tomorrow. As I walked out into the gray afternoon, I felt a strange mixture of nausea and relief. It's a curious thing, realizing you're about to destroy your own child's future, and that you're right to do it. Driving home, the rain turned heavier. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray and silver, and I found myself talking aloud again, the way lonely men do. Mary, I'm sorry, I whispered. I failed him somewhere, didn't I? But in my mind, I heard her steady voice, the way she used to speak when I doubted myself. You didn't fail him, Charlie. You just gave him too much rope. That night, I sat at my desk in the study and drafted a letter to Brian. No anger, no theatrics, just facts written in my neat, old-fashioned hand. Brian, I've seen the documents. I know what you did. The house, the mortgage, the forged signature. I've hired a lawyer. The bank and the county have been notified. You'll be hearing from them soon. You could have come to me. You could have asked. I would have helped you. But you decided to steal instead. This isn't about money anymore. It's about dignity. Mine, and whether you like it or not, yours. Dad, I folded it neatly, sealed it, and placed it in the outgoing mail slot. Old habits die hard. Then I poured myself a glass of whiskey, Mary's bottle, untouched since her funeral, and sat by the window as thunder rolled in the distance. The first strike of lightning illuminated the yard for a heartbeat, and in that flash, I saw the outline of the oak tree Mary had planted the year Brian was born. It had grown tall, proud, and yielding, and I thought, not without irony, that both the tree and the boy had drawn from the same soil, one reaching for light, the other learning only how to take. I took a slow sip, felt the burn, and set into the empty room. Let's see how he handles a storm for once. I didn't sleep much that week. You don't. When your own blood has written your name in lies and sold your home for profit. The nights were long and restless. The floorboards creaked like old bones. Every noise sounded like a memory try to speak. I'd sit by the kitchen window, watching the street lights flicker against the wet pavement, and wonder what Mary would have done in my place. Probably nothing. She always believed time revealed truth better than any confrontation. But I was done waiting for time. I wanted Brian to look me in the eye and realize that the man he'd underestimated still had teeth. Harold filed the fraud report on Wednesday. By Friday, I received a letter from the bank acknowledging a pending investigation. They'd frozen the loan temporarily, which meant the payments would stop and the property couldn't be foreclosed or sold. It was the first breath of relief I'd had in weeks, but it wasn't enough. I wanted him to know I had done it and that I was still one move ahead. So I called him. He picked up on the third ring, his voice polished and falsely cheerful. Hey, Dad, how's my favorite retiree? I was thinking, I said, keeping my tone flat, we should talk in person. A pause, just long enough for his instinct to whisper that something was wrong. Sure, he said. Everything okay? Couldn't be better. I was just thinking about my will. Might be time for some changes. I let the silence hang. That got his attention. Your will? He repeated, cautious now. Yes. I want to make sure things are fair. Why don't we have lunch tomorrow? That little cafe by your office, Linda Street Bistro, wasn't it? He hesitated again, then laughed, forced and thin. You're not going to ambush me with health insurance brochures, are you? Wouldn't dream of it, I said. Noon tomorrow. I arrived early. The cafe was one of those modern places where they serve water in wine glasses and call sandwiches artisanal. I chose a table by the window, ordered black coffee, and spread the folder on the table. The papers inside weren't the originals. Harold had those. These were copies. But they looked official enough. I'd also brought something new. A small recorder, no bigger than a key fob, tucked beneath the folder flap. It wasn't that I expected a confession. I just wanted him to stop pretending. At 12:09, Brian walked in, crisp suit, gold watch, the faint scent of expensive cologne that always struck me as insecurity disguised as success. He smiled too, quickly. Dad. I gestured to the seat across from me. You're late. Traffic. He sat, adjusting his tie, scanning the table. What's all this? Paperwork, I said. You love paperwork. He chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. The waitress appeared. He ordered salmon and a mineral water. I didn't order food. When she left, I slid the folder toward him. Thought you might want to take a look at what your old man's been up to. He opened it, flipping through the first few pages. His face didn't change much. That was what scared me. Just a tiny tightening around the eyes. I see you've been busy, he said. I have. He closed the folder slowly. You've made a mess for yourself, Dad. You shouldn't have gone to the bank. I thought you said it was a clerical mix-up. It was, he said smoothly, leaning back. But now that you've filed reports, it's a whole different story. You've basically accused your own family of fraud. I've accused someone of fraud, I corrected. The evidence will tell us who. His composure cracked for the first time. Do you even understand what happens next? He'll drag us all through hell. My job, Kelly's. Your job? I said quietly. You mean the one you financed with a stolen loan? Don't worry, I'm sure your colleagues will understand. Dad, he said, lowering his voice, glancing around. Listen to me. I can fix this. I can pay it off next quarter, maybe sooner. We'll make it disappear. You can't pay off honesty, Brian. That's the difference between us. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose like a man burdened by other people's stupidity. I'm not your enemy. I'm your son. I just took a shortcut. You wouldn't understand. Business today moves fast. Business? I said, you forged a dead woman's husband's name. That's not business. That's betrayal. His jaw clenched. You don't get it, do you? Everything I do, everything, was for us, for the family. You think I wanted to go begging to investors? I used what was available. Your father, I said, that's what was available. He leaned forward now, voice dropping to a hiss. You're overreacting. You'll destroy everything for nothing. No, I said, meeting his eyes, for the truth. He laughed then, short, bitter, almost pitying. You're old, Dad. You don't know how the world works anymore. You think people care about honesty? About some moral code written in a church hymn? They care about leverage. You've got none. That's when I smiled just a little. Oh, I've got some, I said. For instance, I have a friend who's very good with documents. He's already spoken to the authorities. The bank's frozen the mortgage. They're investigating the notary and your company account. B. Merton Enterprises. Wasn't it? He froze. Just a heartbeat, but enough. His face went pale, the confident veneer cracking like old paint. You didn't, he said. I did. You think you can win this? I already have. The waitress returned then, oblivious, setting his salmon down with a smile. Anything else for you, gentlemen? Brian forced a smile, shook his head. She walked away, leaving us in silence again. He picked up his fork, stared at the plate, then set it down untouched. "You've ruined me," he said quietly. "No," I said, standing. "I've reminded you what you ruined yourself." He looked up at me, hatred burning through the fear. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but you'll never forget it." I left him sitting there in that pristine cafe, surrounded by polite chatter and the faint sound of rain against the windows. Outside, the clouds had started to break, a thin slice of pale sunlight cutting through the gray. I took out my phone and called Harold. "It's done," I said. "Good," he replied. "Now brace yourself. He'll come after you next." I looked up at that fragile beam of sunlight and thought of Mary's voice again. Let him try, because I wasn't the naive old man he thought he'd beat. I was the father who'd finally stopped forgiving. The call came 2 weeks later. It was a gray Monday morning, the kind that looks like it's given up on daylight altogether. The kettle was still boiling when the phone rang, and for a moment I thought it might be Harold following up on the case. But the voice on the line was younger, harder. "Mr. Merton? This is Officer Delgado from the Denver County Fraud Division. We're calling to inform you that the investigation has resulted in formal charges being filed against your son, Brian Merton." I closed my eyes. The words landed with both satisfaction and sorrow. "Charges?" I repeated. "Yes, sir. Forgery, wire fraud, and unlawful use of a financial instrument. There's also evidence the notary was complicit. We'll need you to appear for a preliminary hearing next Tuesday." "I'll be there," I said quietly. After hanging up, I just stood there, one hand on the kitchen counter, staring at the chipped mug Mary had painted with blue flowers years ago. I wasn't sure whether to feel vindicated or hollow. Maybe both. Courtrooms always smell the same: old wood, dust, and tension. Brian sat 2 tables away, dressed in his best suit, though it didn't fit him as confidently as before. His hair was slicked back, his tie slightly askew, eyes ringed with exhaustion. Kelly was there too, sitting behind him, pale and stiff. She didn't look at me. When the judge entered, everyone stood. I followed the movement, my cane tapping against the marble floor. The hearing itself was procedural. Reading of charges, confirmation of counsel, acknowledgement of evidence. But I'll never forget the moment they said my name aloud in connection to his crime. The victim, Mr. Charles H. Merton. That word, victim, felt strange. I'd been many things in my life: husband, father, worker, taxpayer, widower. But never that. Never the man who needed protecting. When they asked me to confirm the authenticity of the documents, I rose and approached the bench. My knees trembled slightly, but my hand was steady as I pointed to the forged signature. "That's not mine," I said. My voice echoed more than I expected. "It looks like mine, but it's not. I've signed my name every day for 70 years, on paychecks, receipts, letters to my wife. I know my own hand." The judge nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Merton. You may step down." As I turned, my eyes met Brian's. He looked away first. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited like crows. Someone shouted, "Mr. Merton, is it true your son defrauded you out of over $300,000? I didn't answer. Harold shielded me with a hand, guiding me toward the car. But another question stopped me cold. "Do you want him punished?" I turned then, facing the microphones and lenses, and said simply, "I want the truth punished." It wasn't a rehearsed line. It was just the only honest thing I could still offer. The sentencing came 6 weeks later. By then the story had spread. Elderly father outsmarts his own son in mortgage fraud scandal. Local papers, morning talk shows, even one of those cheap TV segments with dramatic background music. Brian took a plea deal. 3 years probation. Restitution of all funds. Permanent mark on his professional license. The company he'd started was dissolved. The notary lost her certification. When the judge read the final sentence, Brian didn't look at me. Not once. But I watched him. Not with anger anymore, just kind of quiet mourning. The way you might watch a storm roll away after it's torn down half your roof. As he stood to leave, I said softly, "Brian." He stopped at the doorway, but didn't turn. "You thought I wouldn't notice," I said. "You thought I'd fade quietly while you built your empire on my name. But I remember every lie you ever told me. Every small one that led to this. I hope someday you do too." He said nothing. The bailiff opened the door and he walked out. Afterward, the courthouse steps were flooded with press again, but this time I didn't hide. One reporter asked if I'd considered giving an interview for a feature about elder financial abuse. I hesitated, then nodded. A week later, they printed the article with a photo of me sitting on my porch, the oak tree stretching behind me. The headline read, "He thought his father was too old to notice." The story went viral, as they say. I received letters from strangers across the country. Children promising to call their parents more, old men thanking me for reminding them not to be silent. The attention felt strange, but there was something cleansing about it too. For once, my silence had turned into a voice others could hear. That evening I sat by the window again, the last orange light of sunset pouring across the kitchen table. The documents were gone, the case closed, but the house still held its ghosts. Mary's photo sat beside my teacup. I lifted it slightly, smiled at her familiar face. "It's over, love," I said. "He won't take anything from us again." The kettle began to whistle softly, like a sigh of relief. Outside, the oak tree swayed gently in the breeze, its leaves catching the dying sunlight. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like evidence. It felt like home. And though I knew I'd never hear from my son again, I also knew this. I hadn't lost my family to betrayal. He'd lost his to greed. When I went to bed that night, I stopped by the window one last time. The street was quiet. The lights from the neighboring houses flickered like stars. I whispered to the dark, not out of bitterness, but of peace. He thought I was too old to notice. Turns out, I was just old enough to remember everything.